Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SempreMilan podcast. I'm your host, Ollie Fisher, joined once again by Anthony Torgrud.
What's up, guys? Glad to be back. Looking forward to an exciting episode.
Yes, we have a very, very special guest on with us. It's Serie A commentating royalty, Adam Summerton. Thank you very much for joining us, Adam.
Thank you for the introduction. Very kind.
Not a problem at all. You've been on the podcast before. It was 2 years ago. I checked, and almost 2 years ago to the day. So,
right.
yeah, a lot has changed since then. But yeah, before we dive into this week's episode and obviously the questions that we have to ask, have to say thank you to our founding members over on the SempreMilan Substack: Des Windsor McGlynn, Ali Tareen, Tito, Matt Moritz, Pullman, Joey Gawler, Kemin, MJ, Mats, Luke Villano, Raul Escobar, Rajat, Carlo Fassi, Nasser, Merlin Flinker, Derek Favretto, and Heavenly 13. Did we get up to 20 names? We're nearly there. But yeah, thank you everybody who's supporting what we do over on the Substack. Go and check it out. You can try a week for free. That's where we're doing a lot of bonus content, bonus podcasts, longer read stuff, and some early access exclusives as well. So go check that out if you haven't done already. But yeah, as I said, July 2022 was the last time that we had you on the podcast. We had just won the Scudetto against the odds, you might say. I guess the first question is, in your eyes, of course, what's happened since then? Why weren't we able to turn it into a dynasty? Why are we now back into being not a laughing stock, but you know, the last two seasons it's been Napoli and Inter have run away with it, and feels like we weren't able to seize the momentum. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think one of the things is a real strength, I suppose you could say, of Italian football right now is that it is competitive at the top end. You can't relax. You can't take anything for granted. I mean, look at Napoli last season, having run away with the title the season before. It's tough. And we'll see how Inter can defend the title this time, but several different winners in a number of years now. I think that tells you how competitive the league is at the top end and how difficult it is to defend the Serie A title. I'd say the success of the Italian sides in Europe in recent seasons is further evidence of that competitiveness. I thought the race for the Champions League places as well, even further backs that up this season, last season, I should say. So I think that is part of it. Maybe you could say that you always have to look at activity in the market and how the squad was strengthened, players that were kept, players who were let go, players who were recruited. You look at Inter's recruitment in recent times, and it might be a bit of a sore point to come on a Milan podcast and talk about that. But I do admire what they've done, particularly in terms of how savvy they've been in terms of free transfers. I know people will be yelling, yeah, but they spend a fortune on wages. And yes, they do, but they've been creative. And I think that is what Milan have got to really do as well, because we know that there isn't the money in Serie A that there is, for example, for teams to spend in the Premier League. They have to be quite creative in what they do. And I felt last summer, to a degree, Milan did that. I felt at the end of the summer, I looked at areas of the pitch where I felt that they needed to strengthen, particularly the right wing. I thought that was a glaring area. And I felt that they did do that. And what I would say about Milan for next season is that I feel that we maybe haven't still seen the full benefits of last summer's recruitment. I think there are players there who have still got a lot to give, higher ceilings that they've not hit yet. And maybe we'll see that as a benefit for Milan this coming season, is that certain players, I think of someone like Chukwueze, for example. I think I saw a lot of him in Spain, and I think there's a real player there. Okafor is another one, Musa, of course. And then you've got others like Reinders who did do pretty well in his first season. So I'm quite intrigued, actually, by Milan, particularly with the new coach there as well, to see how those players recruited last summer now continue to kick on. I mean, if you think in the past, I mean, I can remember other players. Rafael Leao is an example, isn't he? He was criticised early on in his Milan career and has then become a very important player. So we'll see.
Well, building off of that, what were your thoughts on the sacking of Pioli?
I felt for him. I felt sorry for him, I have to say, because I admire the job that he's done at Milan. When I think to the situation that he inherited was a difficult one. He was also seen by a lot of people, I include myself in this, as somebody who was maybe a stopgap, but a coach with a fairly provincial reputation, who was maybe considered not good enough, not big enough for the Milan job. But I felt that he came in knowing that people felt like that about him. showed a great deal of class in terms of the way that he conducted himself. I felt that the way that he embraced and used Zlatan Ibrahimovic to his advantage was very clever, very savvy, the way that he did that. Ego would have got in the way of a lot of other coaches, I feel, in terms of welcoming in Ibrahimovic and almost treating him like a de facto assistant. It was kind of, he really maximised what Ibrahimovic could bring to the party, and I really admired that as well. I would be lying though if I didn't feel that maybe it was just showing signs, particularly at the end of last season, as a freshening up, a change was needed. It's hard to argue with it and defend his record against Inter in the derbies. I mean, that's been poor for some time now, and I know that. I mean, even from when I've travelled to Milan to cover games, and I've got in cabs with taxi drivers, they're always great to talk to about the football. And that was what was repeated to me time and time again by Milan cabbies and even Inter cabbies as well. Look, he doesn't do himself any favours with his record against Inter. That's a real black mark on his copybook. So I can understand why a change has been made. But I think on the whole, he can look back with a great deal of pride on his record at Milan and hold his head high. I love that story that he told when they won the Scudetto, where he said that at the end of every season, he said his mum and his dad are like the good cop and the bad cop. And at the end of every season, his mum used to remind him he'd never won a major trophy, and his dad would be the one to, big him up. I mean, wow. I mean, so obviously she can't say that anymore, can she? But yeah, I think he can look back with pride.
Yeah, he's got the tattoo as well now to show for it as well. I think we were all on kind of a similar wavelength when it came to Pioli. It was almost sad the way that it ended, but then he got that send off in the final game, and so we move into a new era. It's almost half a decade, and in the 2010s, managers used to be lucky to last a season with us. So in a sense, that's a positive. Speaking of new era, we decided to go with Paulo Fonseca as the new head coach. We were linked with various names. There was Julen Lopetegui was supposedly close to arriving, and then the plug got pulled on that. Obviously, Conte was mentioned, but we don't think he was ever really a serious candidate. Sergio Conceição as well. De Zerbi, when it was announced he was leaving Brighton. What are your thoughts on the hiring of Fonseca when there were perhaps some more glamorous names out there, but we might have gone for someone who's sort of continuity and building off a platform rather than trying to completely overhaul it like Conte might have done?
I was relatively surprised, I have to say, when you look at the list of names that you mentioned there as well. I was relatively surprised, but I think I'm probably basing a fair degree of that on watching what happened at Roma. And I had to sort of remind myself and look back and ponder and think, am I being a little harsh to be surprised that he's got a job the size of Milan? Because I think it's easy to look at his Roma record and say, well, does that justify, is in any way getting a job like Milan? Particularly as we've seen him in Serie A for 2 years. But I think what we have to remember is that he was at Roma at a very difficult time to be the Roma coach, really, because it was a club in a state of flux, both in terms of the ownership, which is obviously a really important factor. And it was during the COVID period as well, which any club, it was difficult for everybody in that time. But I think there was a change of sporting director, wasn't there? There was a change of ownership. So it was a hard situation to manage. I believe in his final season, they were fifth, I think, in Serie A Roma. He did take them to the last four of a major European competition, which is a good achievement. I'll have to be honest, I wasn't always that impressed with his Roma side. I really wasn't. I watched them quite a bit and I had misgivings about the team, but I look what he's done at Lille and I think he can look back at that with pride. He certainly plays what you could say is football that can be quite attractive to watch, which the Milan fans may well enjoy. He's kind of looked at as having a preferred formation. And I suppose statistically, if you look at how many times he's deployed it, this would be true that his preferred formation is a 4-2-3-1. But he did use 4-3-3 at Lille. He has used three at the back in the past as well. And I quite like that in a modern manager. They're not necessarily wedded to a particular system. Because I think very often you see coaches, it's almost talked about as a strength that a coach, the players know what system they're going to play. They all understand. I actually think that sometimes coaches can restrict themselves in that respect with this very rigid philosophy that we have to play in a certain. He has got a philosophy, but I think that he's happy to play in different ways around that philosophy. So in that respect, I like that kind of versatility and pragmatism to a degree that somebody like Fonseca will bring. But I always struggle to sort of give a firm opinion when any club makes a managerial recruitment, because as I've just said to you about Pioli, when he was appointed, I was in the camp of, is he the right guy for Milan? Is he a provincial coach? Is he a big enough personality? And look, he goes on, he wins the Scudetto, he gets Milan to the latter stages of the Champions League, back in the Champions League. And overall, while it ended not great, did a really good job. So always have to be careful when assessing new coaches. But I think you can tell there, the way I'm thinking at the moment, it's quite a mixed bag in my own mind.
Yeah, it's. I think the fans kind of have a similar feeling as well, that they've seen his past at Roma, like you said, and were let down with that appointment, or they saw more glamorous names out there. But I also don't think he's had a squad like ours. I think the Milan squad is a bit stronger than those other teams that he was at, and maybe this summer it gets even stronger. We'll see. And that leads me to the next question: is what do you think Milan need to do this summer to bridge that gap with Inter?
I think a really important thing clearly this summer with the loss of Olivier Giroud, whose loss will be really keenly felt, because whilst, it amazes me when people still send me messages when I big him up on things like Twitter, people still send me messages doing him down and saying Olivier Giroud. And then, you say to these people, just go and have a look at his record and and consider his longevity. And I don't think you can lose somebody like him and it not have an impact. And it's very important for me that for Milan's success next season, that he's effectively replaced. Now, it looks to me like they're going to try and replace him with somebody quite young. I mean, Zirkzee has been mentioned a lot. A name that really intrigued me that I saw them linked with was Calvert-Lewin, who I think would be a really good addition actually at Milan. The only problem with Calvert-Lewin, as everybody knows, is his injury record, and he would cost a lot of money in respect to transfer fee and wages. So he's not really somebody that you could take a punt on because he'd take up a lot of your budget. So that's a difficult one. But just in terms of him as a player and what he would bring, I think he would do very well in Italy, actually. Calvert-Lewin, I really like him. So that for me is really important. As I've already said to you, I think getting more out of some of the players who were recruited last summer, for me, is very important for Fonseca. I think that will be a key priority for him to get into very early, talking to lads like Chukwueze and Okafor and Musa and saying, look, make yourselves starters. Give me a decision to make, because they're good. I think several of them there have got the ability to give him difficult decisions to make. So I think that's important. I look at the right back area, and whilst I like Calabria more than some people do, and I see Florenzi as effective backup, I wonder whether that is somewhere that they might look to strengthen. I would like to see them bring in another centre half. Although if we saw the Kalulu of the title winning season again, then, him and Tomori for me is a very good, as we saw there. I mean, he's had a lot of bad luck with injuries, hasn't he, since then? But if those two were paired together and stayed fit, that's already a good pair. And you've got Teo Hernandez, who's one of the best left backs in the world, in my opinion. You've got Menyon, who's one of the best goalkeepers in the world, in my opinion. I just wonder whether in midfield, fellas, whether what they feel about the blend and the balance there, as to whether they might feel a bit more physicality and personality maybe is needed there. I'm not sure. I mean, I'll defer to you guys on that, because that's something I've been pondering ahead of coming on here. Is the midfield and I know there's quality there. There's good players, and Loftus-Cheek's had a good first season. I think he's still got more room to grow, and Reinder's similar. Benacer, we saw his quality when he got fit towards the end of last season. But how do you feel about the midfield? Do you feel that's somewhere where you'd like to see players come in?
Yeah, I think last summer was an interesting one, because we went into the window thinking that we probably needed to add one or two players, and then the sale of Tonali to Newcastle meant that we basically needed to rebuild the midfield with the money. And I think we felt like, as a fan base, pretty collectively, that we'd only signed box-to-box players, and we didn't really sign anyone for that holding role. So if you look at Reinders, Loftus-Cheek, Benacer, Musa, even Pobega, who's been on the fringes, had a bad injury and stuff, they're all more natural, like classic Mezzala types, or box-to-box players who like to get forward. And we're sort of missing that screen in front of the defence. It's often been written that we miss Franck Kessie.
Yes.
But like by the end of his time with us, he was playing as the 10. Like, it all got a bit strange on that front as well. But I do think we miss someone who's a battler, someone who does the dirty work, someone who is happy to sit in. I mean, we've been linked with Yusuf Fofana, who's at Monaco. But when I speak to people about him, they also say that he does his best when he's able to get forward and drive with the ball. So then you start thinking, is there like an Amrabat type or a Jorginho? Not that they'd come, but just that type of player who is a classic number 6. You know, who leads the rankings in balls recovered and tackles and interceptions rather than dribbles. And you know, I don't think there's a balance to the department at the moment. And yeah, I think we need to address that. Højbjerg's another one who's been linked, and people turn their noses up at him, but I actually think he'd be a pretty good addition.
I like him.
Yeah, a really tidy player.
Yeah.
And it sounds like he'd be available on the cheap because he's got a year left at Spurs and wants to play Champions League football. So someone like that might be good. AJ, I don't know if you agree.
Yeah, that was basically what I was going to say in less colorful words. You know, I was going to say we need a defensive mid. That's what it just every time. You know, our goals conceded record last season was just abysmal. The goals scored was not the problem. You know, we were able to find the back of the net. We just couldn't prevent anyone else from finding ours. So if we could just tidy that up somehow, and I think a big part of it is not actually the defense. I think it's the line in front of the defense needs to help them. So yeah,
I think
mid might tidy it.
Ollie, I think you made a great point when you mentioned Franck Kessie, because yes, I take what you were saying about maybe he was more ambitious going forwards as well, but I think he did play an important role in that side. For me, a midfield, it's always about balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, only yesterday I saw a picture of Paul Pogba on X because he was at the France game. It reminded me of that Juve midfield with Marquisio and Vidal and Pogba and Pirlo, and I thought, what a balanced midfield. And I look at that Milan midfield right now, and obviously I'm not going to compare them to those four, but I'm not quite sure there's quite the right blend, and maybe that does affect, as you've said, Anthony, there, I mean, I looked this up before it came on. I wanted to remind myself, Milan had the 11th best defensive record last season in Serie A. I mean, that tells you so much. I mean, only Inter scored more goals. But the 11th best defensive record, and that is with one, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree, but I think one of the best goalkeepers in the world in goal. So that tells me that the balance in front, because I mean, Theo Hernandez, I know that he's not necessarily part of his biggest strength really is going forward, admittedly, but I think he's a perfectly capable defender as well. So I think if you were to ask coaches across the world, if you were to give you top 5 left backs in the world, I think a lot of coaches would have him in their top 5 left backs. So, and I think Tomori is a perfectly good defender as well. But yes, there were injuries, weren't there? There was a lot of interchanging in the back line, but I tend to agree with what you're saying there, that what's in front of them played a big part in that goals against record last season. I think that's undeniable, really.
Oh yeah, 100%. And like I was looking at the stats because, as you say, we let in the 11th. We had the 11th best defensive record in the league, and I think it's 9 out of the last 10 seasons in Serie A, the team with the best defensive record has won the title. So you know, it's like the old saying, defending wins titles. I do believe that to be true in Serie A, and it might not always make for the most entertaining. But, you know, Inter looked pretty good last season to me. They were keeping goals out and banging them in at the other end. So it is about finding that balance. And speaking more generally here, how did you find it? I've just mentioned Inter. How did you find it covering Serie A last season? Because obviously it's back-to-back seasons now that we've had runaway title winners. So like that's out of the way from January onwards. But there were some interesting stories like Bologna being surprised top 4, Napoli, chaos just descended into a tire fire. The relegation battle went all the way, and I know it's it might not dominate the media headlines, but I always find that quite fun. You know, when Sassuolo dropped, that was a bit of a shock. So yeah, how was it? I thought it was pretty entertaining season overall, barring them lot over the Navigli.
I just love covering the league. I've got a real love affair with Serie A that goes back to being a kid, really. I just call Calcio the ongoing soap opera. That's how I feel it is. I mean, even if you have a runaway title winner, as you quite rightly point out, we have done the last 2 seasons. there are always those stories. I was intrigued by the battle for Europe. You're fascinated by sometimes when things are going wrong. It's almost as interesting. Just looking in at Napoli last season, just going, how? I mean, how have they allowed this to happen? It felt so much of it was self-inflicted as well. The situation at Napoli. I know you guys probably won't like this, but I really admired Inter last season. I really did. I felt that they really could have gone on and seriously challenged for the Champions League, enough competition. I was at the first leg actually at San Siro, and I just felt that night they didn't really quite do enough to exert themselves. They weren't brave enough. They weren't confident enough to really totally try and dominate that game. And they paid for it in the end. But, Atalanta, I was at the Europa League final. I know it's not Serie A, but what they did in Europe was just fantastic. Like you say, there's just so many different stories. And Thiago Motta and Bologna, wow. Just wow. That's got to be one of the greatest achievements in Europe, across all the European leagues this season. So, it would have been good if we'd had a title race. I think we will do this season. I would like to think it'll be tighter this time. We'll see. But I'm intrigued by all the changes. Obviously, Motta going in at Juventus, Conte going in at Napoli, Gasperini deciding to stay and build on what he's done at Atalanta, Fonseca coming in at Milan. There's sort of the deck chairs are being moved around a little bit, aren't they? And we always get that every summer, and we'll see who people sign. But it's just always a really good league to cover. And I always say to people with Serie A, one of the things that I always enjoy, and this never really changes, is that one of the things I think it's one of the best leagues to watch is that you get the real tactical intrigue with Serie A. It's a very tactical league. There's a lot of thought process goes in terms of the coach. I love the battles on the sideline between the two coaches. But what it's also got now, as it has got that blood and thunder about it that you might get from some of the other European leagues. So it's a lovely blend, Serie A, because you get those exciting, sometimes high-scoring matches, but you also get to enjoy those tactical battles as well that are less prevalent perhaps in a league like the Premier League, or players who've played in both very often say that, don't they? That it's more physicality and energy in the Premier League, less of a thought process, more so in Italy. So I really enjoy that about Italian football.
You kind of answered my next question already, so I'll just make it a bit more specific. What moments stood out to you while you were commentating last season?
Oh, wow. Trying to remember big moments. Obviously, from an Italian perspective, not necessarily Serie A, but the Italian one that probably sticks out to me the most is being at the Europa League final and witnessing one of the greatest individual performances I've ever seen in a major final, and one of the greatest team performances I've ever seen in a major final, when we bear in mind the opposition, who had not lost all season. I think I was also at both the Liverpool games for Atalanta and the tactical coaching masterclass that Gasperini put on against both Leverkusen and Liverpool and across the competition actually was just a true joy to watch. It really, really was just outstanding. And that is one of my abiding memories of not just the season just gone, but covering Italian sides in general. It was so memorable. I can't tell you. To be in Dublin for the final was just a joy because of the way that the two sides conducted themselves, the way the two sets of fans conducted themselves. It was a real feel-good final, that. So I'd have to say that's got to be a really strong memory of mine from the season. As I said to you earlier, I greatly admired the way that Inter approached things this season. They were such a well-balanced team. Juve were very difficult to watch, I've got to say. At times, they were a really tough watch. Milan, if we're honest, I think there were times when I watched them and I thought, it might be clicking again, this. And there were times when I watched them and I thought, I'm not really sure what he's trying to do here or where this is going. It was a real sort of...
You and me both.
Yeah, we were sort of scratching our heads at times. And obviously the relegation battle as well got exciting too. But yeah, if I had to pick out one thing for Italian football last season, it would have been that Atalanta in the Europa League. I just thought it was remarkable what they achieved.
I think it's funny, like when you come into we're sort of seeing it now with the Euros and stuff, but you get to like the knockout stages of a European competition. Obviously, they pre-do the draw, so you know who you would face in the semis once you do the quarters. And everyone was sort of thinking, it's going to be potentially Milan Liverpool in Dublin, and like what an amazing occasion that would be. And I don't want to disrespect either of the two teams that got there, but I don't think anyone before the season would have had Leverkusen Atalanta down as the final. And yet it was just incredible. Like I can't remember where I watched it in a hotel bar, and everybody in it was just absolutely stunned at like, who is this Atalanta? Because it was in London, so nobody really knew them. It's like, who is this Atalanta? Who's this Gasparini guy? It was a perfect final performance. Like
it was,
it was outstanding. And Lookman, I don't know if he'll ever have another game like that again, but that's kind of like, remember when he was coming through when he was a lot younger, and then he got that move to Leipzig, I think it was, and he was sort of like, watch out for this kid. He's going to be something special. And that was the game. That was like his crowning moment almost. It might not have gone exactly how everyone saw, but the goals that he scored in that game were just outstanding. So I echo your thoughts on that. Kind of mentioned it before, but there has been a lot of movement in Serie A this summer. Never seems to be plain sailing in Serie A. There's always something going on going into a summer, but this summer in particular has already been as you say, rearranging of the deck chairs and stuff. Conte to Napoli, Motta to Juve. We've got a new head coach. There's only really Atalanta and Inter that have that kind of continuity. Maybe Roma with De Rossi. Who do you see at this moment in time as being the biggest winners and losers? Some clubs have done a bit of business as well. Like Inter have got in Taremi and who else? The goalkeeper Martinez, and is it Zielinski going there on a free?
Yes, that was. I'd have to double check whether that's been confirmed. I've taken my eye a bit off transfers, if I'm honest. But
I wish I could do the same.
I think that was seen as like just a done deal a long time ago, wasn't it?
And Juve have already got. It looks like Douglas Luiz is in, maybe Kefren Turam as well. Obviously, it's quite difficult because the window technically only opened yesterday, but balancing it up with the coach movements and stuff like that. Who do you think's looking good?
Well, I have to say, when I think about the forthcoming season, what interests me so much is how different some of these top clubs are going to look, because it's real different changes in approach, isn't it? When you consider the switch from Allegri to Thiago Motta, this is a big change, and it's very hard to predict how it will go. I mean, you'd have to say the same. I know Napoli have gone through a lot of coaches in the last 12 months, but to go from all those different coaches to Conte and all that he will bring and the personality that comes with Conte, I mean, and obviously the thing that I'm similar to most people, what I'm intrigued the most about is how on earth is Conte and De Laurentiis gonna work? I mean, if ever that looked like an accident waiting to happen, I mean, that is. I mean, how long is that going to last before it all combusts? So, I mean, who knows? It could end up being a beautiful, unlikely marriage. I really don't know, but I tend to go. It might more likely to probably go the other way, but we'll see. But just if you look in terms of his style of football, I mean, how different that is to say Spalletti, who achieved so much with Napoli, and the different approaches there. Obviously, Lazio have gone through coaching changes too. I suppose you always have to look at it and think that the sides who've got that bit of stability and continuity and consistency, like Inter with Inzaghi and like Atalanta with Gasparini, I'm sort of minded to think that perhaps they have a bit of a head start on everybody else in some ways, because I think that can be quite important, can't it? That consistency and continuity. So we'll see how that plays out too. But a lot of it is the unknown. As I say, I mean, I struggle to predict how Fonseca will do, because you look at his track record, and yes, he had great success in Ukraine, but with the greatest of respect, he was at the biggest club there, and you would expect him to have success there. I think I liked what he did at Lille, and I think that's got him the Milan job, really. I don't think he's got the Milan job off the back of Roma, has he? He's got it probably off his reputation as, I don't know if rehabilitated is the right word, but it's been enhanced again by what he did in France, I feel. So I'm really unsure which way that will go. So, but this is what I enjoy about looking ahead to the new season. It's the fact that it is difficult to predict. you could look at, say, 5 or 6 teams and go, well, I could make a case for any of them really challenging right up there, but I could also make a case for them floundering and a new manager not settling in. It's really difficult. I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers because I haven't, but I quite enjoy the fact that we haven't got all the answers because it makes it more fun, doesn't it, to see which ways it will go. But clearly recruitment is going to be so important. And I think Milan will be very, very, very acutely aware of the need to get the right players for how Fonseca wants to play. That will be key to give him that chance, particularly where, as I say, when somebody like an Inzaghi sharing the same city has got that consistency and continuity.
Yeah, and the last few seasons, since that Juve run of dominance ended, the last few seasons seem to suggest that it's really hard to defend the title. And while now, if you were to go on the bookmakers website, Inter would probably be clear favourites to win the league again because of how dominant they were last season. What we've seen in the last sort of half decade seems to suggest that actually they're probably going to drop off quite a bit. But it feels really hard to predict that happening at the moment, So that is where...
Yeah, it is. I would make them favourites, and I agree with you. It is difficult to see a drop off when you consider, the quality that there is in that squad. I would say it's one of the more experienced, or if you want to use a different word, older squads in the league. So that's a fact to consider within. I'm not suggesting by any means that this is a squad at the end of its shelf life at all, but I think that there are teams like Milan with younger squads with more room for growth. Whereas if you look at the Inter squad, a lot of them have, obviously somebody like Thuram, you would say, has got more room for growth. But if you look across the piece, there's a lot of players in the Inter squad who you'd say they've probably hit their peak or at a point where it'll start to drop off. So that maybe that is just something to consider. But they're still a very, very good side. And I go back to what I said earlier. The balance of them was so impressive. And they've got an excellent coach in my view as well. I'm always amazed that Inzaghi is not linked to other jobs in the Premier League, for example. He very rarely seems to get linked with jobs in England, which all the top managers working outside of the Premier League tend to be linked, even if they don't end up making the move. So that always surprises me. But what Motta will do at Juventus, I still think there's an awful lot of work to do at Juventus. It's a massive job that he's taken on. And I think the fact that they've just let 2 of their best young players, academy graduates, go in order to be able to fund a move for Douglas Luiz, partly, that tells you where they are as well. The balancing act that Juve have still got to do in order to get players through the door. And that would worry me if I were a Juventus fan, because whilst someone like Illing Jr. and Barrenechea, Barrenechea was out on loan, Illing Jr. didn't get a great deal of opportunities last season. I don't think it's a great look that players like that are leaving the club, because I think sometimes as I say, it's not a good sign. I don't think that. I suppose another way of looking at it is that look, it's a way of funding the transfers, and that they feel they need to make to improve their first 11. You might say an Illing Jr. is good for the squad, but is he going to start? Whereas they'll say, well, Douglas Luiz comes in and starts, and he makes the team better. So I do get it, but what I'm saying is that they're still, in a way, and have been for a number of years now, hamstrung by the whole financial effect of Ronaldo. They're still recovering from that, Juventus. And that's another reason why for Giuntoli and for Thiago Motta at the moment, Juve is, I talk about Milan's need to be creative. I would say it's even more so for Juventus, how that need to be creative in the transfer market. And that's clearly what they're looking to try and do.
I think a lot of the transfers right now you're seeing specifically from Juventus, it's worrying from a financial point of view, because you need to send 2 players out to bring 1 player in. That's obviously not a sustainable model. Inter has to sell a big star every window. You see Napoli, Napoli's kind of doing their own thing, but even they're trying to offload their biggest name in Osimhen to fund their transfer market. Ironically, Milan's the only team that doesn't have to spend or sell to spend, and we're probably the only ones who won't spend at all. So it's an interesting time right now for the top teams. But I guess where we're at right now, at the very start of the transfer window, before anything's been done, just managers, how do you see the top 5 playing out?
Ooh, Can I ask you both a question? I know you're meant to be asking me the questions, but can I ask you a question in a minute about Rafael Leao? I'm very interested for two Milan fans' perspective on him, but how do I see it panning out? After everything I've just said, I think Inter will win the league again.
Yeah, of course.
But I do think it will be closer this time. Yeah, I think there'll be an improvement in Napoli. I think there will be an improvement at Juventus. Atalanta, I see, is probably around about similar sort of level. Roma under De Rossi, we haven't even mentioned them yet. I mean, it started so well, but I always said when he first got appointed, before he got appointed permanently, when it was he was in that caretaker role, and people say they've got to give him the job. They've got to give him the job, and you couldn't argue with that. They really had to with his record. But I said, you'll never truly know whether it's the right appointment until they have a bad run, and that kind of started to happen a bit, didn't it? After he'd been appointed. So how
it was like us with Gattuso. Exactly the same thing. Club icon, tough tackling midfielder, comes in, rallies the fans. We go on a great run. Got to give him the job. And then, you hit a bit of a wall and it's like, oh no.
Yeah. So how he does with having a full pre-season too is yet another thing to interest and intrigue about this next Serie A season. So I think Inter will win it. I'd say again, I think Milan may well probably be second, and then Napoli and Juve and Roma are in fairly close proximity too. But I think the most important thing for the league is that we get a bit more of a race this time for the title, that it is more, that it holds the intrigue in that. We still got a bit of intrigue last season, as we've already alluded to, for various different reasons, and the race for Europe was good too. But I think the league could, after 2 years where there's been a runaway winner, I think the league could really do now, just for itself, for Serie A in general, could do with a title race this time. But talking about transfers and talking about, needing to raise funds and balance the books and things like that, and bearing in mind where Rafael Leao has come on his journey as a Milan player, he's a fair way into it now, isn't he? In terms of you could almost call him, even though he's still relatively young, a senior player within that Milan setup. When you consider what he would be worth on the open market, and when you consider there was a drop off last season, I felt in his productivity. There were times where he was criticised quite a lot by some senior figures in Italian football, most notably for his work rate and things like that. I'm just interested. I'm not saying that I would do this, but I'm just interested how two Milan fans feel about if there were a big offer for him and it would help Milan in the market in terms of to bring in 2 or 3 players. Would you sell him?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think we've seen with the way that we operate, and this isn't going to be a cop-out answer, but we've seen with the way that our ownership operates, every player does have a price. And I think we're well aware of what realistic market value is for some of these players. So, for example, for Theo Hernandez, you're looking north of 80 mil because he's one of the best in the world in his position and it's indisputable. Maignan, same sort of thing. With Leao, it's a bit more difficult to kind of try and pin a price on him because we know that we got a big offer from Chelsea. Was it a couple of summers ago or last summer? Can't remember. But sort of that showed that there was the demand there, and they're one of the clubs that at the time could probably afford him. There's been talk about PSG being interested as an Mbappe replacement coming into this window. And yet we found ourselves in a strange position whereas in previous summers, the interest was probably there and we potentially could have cashed in for a big gain. Now, this summer, when we might be tempted by a sale, those clubs aren't really going to come in. And also he seems to feel quite a strong attachment to being here, to being a Milan player. And he seems to also feel a bit of a responsibility to kind of kick on and show everyone what he can become. He signed that long-term renewal until 2028 last year. So for that reason, I can see him staying. Would I personally be tempted to cash in? Yes, because I think the fee that you're going to get, like with the Tonali sale last summer, you can basically raise the level of the entire squad again quite significantly. And I do think Leao has in the last couple of seasons been a bit too up and down. He's our highest paid player by some margin, and he seems to have a 2-month goal drought every season. And I don't think we can get away with that, sadly. And another one of my perhaps hot takes is that I can really see him struggling under Fonseca, which I know might seem strange because he's fellow Portuguese and we should play a better, more expansive style of football. But from everything that I've read, Fonseca is quite possession based. So if we're going to build our game kind of like Portugal are at the Euros, camping in the other team's half, short passing movements, I don't think that is built to his skill set. I think Leao's strongest attributes are without a doubt his explosive athleticism, his pace, his dribbling. We need to get him one-on-one. We need him in transition. We needed him to do damage in the open field. I feel like if Fonseca comes in and plays the way that he has done before, I don't know. I don't know how much he's going to get that, because I think we're going to try kill teams with possession and with passing. And I don't think he's necessarily the best technical winger in the world. With his decision making, it still needs work and things like that. That's a roundabout answer. But yeah, I think he's going to stay.
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to stay, I think the answer is yes. Should he stay? That's a bit more nuanced. I think Oli touched on a lot of good points there. Me personally, I would say at least give him one season under Fonseca, because who knows, he might actually flourish in that type of system under Fonseca. It's going to force him to be more direct, play more inside. Right now he's always going to the byline and making the pass, but now he's going to have to cut in, or at least that's what we think is going to happen. And if he could work on his finishing, make that actually effective, because he really is a low scoring winger for his level. If he could get those numbers up, then all of a sudden now he is in that discussion in the top 5, top 8, whatever it may be. I think right now he's just on the fringe of that, like, really consistently world-class elite level. I think he's just a rung or two below that right now. And if he could polish up his finishing, then I think he could get there. And when you make a big change like the coach, you look at your players and say, okay, is this the time to switch the entire system as well, or is this the time to see how these players adapt into it? So it really just depends on where your mindset's at. And I think the management's looking at it now is the finances are very healthy. If they wanted to, they could spend, well, what it was the figure, 160 million euros without going into debt or without breaching FFP or anything like that. If you sell Leao, you essentially double that figure, right? Which then lets you spend, 40 mil on 7 players as opposed to 20 mil on 7 players like we did last summer. So you could raise the entire level of the entire squad with that one sale. But I just don't see Milan doing it. I think they're going to want to hold on to him, give him this one more season with Teo, with Mignon, the rest of the world-class guys, and see what they can build on. And if it doesn't work, then yeah, I think the door is swinging open pretty soon. So we'll see what happens. But for now, I say hold on to him and give him a chance.
He's our one box office player. Like,
he is box office, yeah.
The
problem. Sorry.
No, go on.
All I was going to say is that whilst he is box office, and there have been times where I've watched him and he's just got me off my seat, even when I'm commentating. I just think I remember he scored one goal. I think it might have been against Inter, actually, cutting in from the left. I remember saying in the commentary, this guy has got the world at his feet. I wouldn't say that about many players. I really wouldn't. That's the big thing to say as a commentator. But I just looked at him and I just thought, this guy could be something like ridiculously good. But the problem is that I'd watch him the following week and he'd have a 6 out of 10. And if you're going to be, as you said, Anthony, if you're going to be that top bracket, you've got to do it almost every week. You've got to be delivering. And the problem with Rafael Leao, and it's probably why the interest that's been shown by other top clubs has not necessarily been totally followed through, is I think there will be doubts about him. I always remember, I'm not saying making a direct comparison by any means, but in his younger days in Serie A, when he was at a time lighting it up with Lazio, I remember people having similar conversations about Felipe Anderson and saying, this lad is on his day. This lad is something special. But it was a similar problem in that you'd watch him one week and you'd be like 9 out of 10, he'd be box office, X Factor, all that jazz. But then you'd watch him the following week and he'd be given the hook after an hour because he was anonymous. And this is what he's... Look, people will have their various opinions on whether Rafael Leao will ever make that leap from being the type of player that we've discussed to a truly elite player. I have to say I have my doubts as I stand right now, but I hope that he does, because he's got so much ability and he's so exciting to watch. And very often he can be the difference maker for Milan, and was so important to them winning the Scudetto a couple of years ago.
On the topic of Leao, did you watch the Portugal game yesterday? What did you think of his performance?
Yeah, I watched bits of it. I didn't watch all of it because I had the kids with me. But yeah, I think that, to be honest with you, you've just hit on a real frustration of mine right now with Portugal, is that I just look at them and I think they'd be so much better and fluid and energetic in that final third if they just took Ronaldo out of it.
Yeah.
And just have Ronaldo as the elder statesman, the leader off the pitch, and somebody who can come on and be a finisher with 20 minutes to go. He can, his role, what it should be, is, for me, is so obvious in that squad now. And he's one of the greatest we've ever seen. But I just look at players like Bernardo Silva, Diogo Jota, Rafael Leao, João Felix, Gonzalo Ramos, and I just look at that and I think how dynamic and fluid and energetic that forward line can be. And I think Rafael Leao is probably one of many players who you could argue is being held back by that reluctance to take Ronaldo out the starting lineup of that Portuguese. And look, Ronaldo being Ronaldo, he might go on and score the winner in the final, and I could look absolutely ridiculous. But I'll still maintain that even if he did that, they'd still be a better team, and team's the operative word here. Team, there would be a better team with him coming on as a sub, not starting. And not even them winning it would change my mind on that, to be honest. I think Portugal have got the potential to be exceptional with the players they've got.
I agree. Yeah. They're a frustrating team to watch. And I saw Leao's performance specifically was very divisive amongst fans on X now. I saw a lot of people, referring to the FOTMOB score, the SOFA score, and how he had a really high rating, but then people saying, 0 goals, 0 assists, pulled off in an hour. And I didn't get to watch the full game. I was at work, so I saw just bits and pieces of it here and there. But yeah, it's an interesting one because that seems to be pretty consistent with him at Portugal. So maybe to Oli's point earlier, under Fonseca is not a good look for Leao. I don't know, but he'll get week in, week out training under it, as opposed to just the international break. So
he's I feel a bit like him that I do about Chiesa right now. Two players who've got devastating ability on their day, who I just, as a football fan, I've always loved those X factor, potentially explosive players. My favorite player as a kid was John Barnes. So you can see, the type of footballer I love, and I watch both of them, and I want them so much to do well, because you can't have enough footballers, can you, who get you off your seats? That's what it's all about. And those two have got that potential to do it, but neither of them can seem to do it consistently enough, can they, right now?
Dare I say it as well, like Leao is a bit of a dying breed of winger, I feel like wingers have become so much more technical, and that's probably influenced by managers like Guardiola and stuff like that. But then even Pep decided, we need Doku in just to give us a bit of something different. And with Leao, it's just direct. I'm going to run at you, one-on-one. Let's have it in the open field, and it feels like you don't see that so much anymore at the highest level. But he's 25 now, so you're sort of moving into that area now of he's not that young anymore. He's played well into triple digits games now in Serie A, and are we starting to see the finished product? His mentality often gets questioned as well, and I think sometimes that can be a lazy narrative, but then other times you sort of see him on the field and you think, does he want it? Does he really want to take that big next step? But I think this next season under Fonseca is pretty massive. Just on the theme of Euro 2024, I don't know how much of it you've managed to see, but have you enjoyed it as a spectacle? It feels like it started there was a lot of mad stuff going on, basically. Romania 3-0 in Ukraine, and there were some fantastic games. The knockout stages are always going to get a bit more cagey, but I think it's been a fun tournament, and I hope that we've seen the lineup for some of these quarterfinal meetings. It could potentially have some iconic moments.
Yeah, we could. I've not enjoyed England, and I didn't enjoy Italy, I've got to say, as the team I look out for next. So in that respect, it's not been a great tournament. I think look, England's problems are well documented, and I think reasonably easily solved in terms of the tweaks that you'd need to make. But as a tournament as a whole, what I've enjoyed most, really, is the attitude of the smaller nations, both in terms of the way that they've played and their supporters, and you've seen what it's meant to them. And Georgia were just great, weren't they, to watch?
Oh, yeah.
Turkey, Albania, another side, as one of the Slovenia, I mean, in a different way, were great. That just saw the effort and the application, and just that's been one of my big takeaways really from this tournament, is just seeing what it means to these smaller nations just to be at a major tournament. I suppose now, as you've just alluded to there, we go from that phase of the tournament and we move on to a different phase where you would hope that the real cream will rise to the crop, the cream will rise to the top now, and we'll see the football in terms of the quality come to the fore, which is what it should ultimately really be about, isn't it, at a major tournament? So we'll see in that respect. I mean, France have flattered to deceive. Germany and Spain, for me, particularly Spain, have played the best football. I wonder whether Spain have they peaked, and if they have peaked, has it happened too early? We'll see in that respect. Sometimes it's not always a bad thing to not be playing your best in the early stages and come good at just the right time. Obviously, England fans will be hoping for that, but bitterly disappointed with Italy. I just felt that it was a classic case of a coach who is trying to change the way that a team plays, maybe hasn't had enough time to achieve that in, I think it's 10 months that he's been in charge. And you might make the conversation as well as to whether he has the players at his disposal at this moment to play the way that he would wish to ultimately play with the Italian national side. I think that is a debate that is worth having. And what seemed to happen to me was that we had a very confused situation, evidenced and underlined by the fact that I think he made 6 changes for the last game. And it just was a confused picture, a lack of identity about the team, and a coach, as I say, who's not maybe had the time to truly make his mark on the squad. And that for me showed it. Look, some people will say that it was that bad that he should go now. Other people, I think I'd be more minded this way, but I take the opinion of others who wouldn't be. But I'd be more minded to say I think this is a good enough coach with enough experience to say maybe he deserves the benefit of the doubt so far. But I can understand why people would say that was bad enough to say, look, this isn't going to work. Let's just cut our losses. So again, I'd be interested to hear your views on that, actually.
It's funny because I read something the other day, and it was 10 years to the day on that particular day since Italy last played a World Cup game. And I was in disbelief reading that stat, like, oh my God, has it really been a decade since they were there? Yeah. And then when you read something like that, and they sort of they did stumble their way into the knockout stages of this competition, you know, with that last minute goal against Croatia. They would have been out otherwise. The 3 points that they had wouldn't have been enough, as it turns out. So they needed that. And then they fell flat on their face with that Switzerland game. But I think the Swiss deserve a lot of credit. Like they carried out a plan perfectly. They pressed. They were brilliant to watch. And I think they'll be a tough opponent for England as well. But speaking to obviously people who are more into the Azzurri than me, I always felt like it might be a tournament too soon for Italy. Yes. Like it's really hard for it all to fall into place in such a short space of time. And I do think they should give Spalletti another tournament. But I remember saying at the time when there were the rumours about who was going to replace Mancini and Spalletti's name came out, I thought, that's not a good marriage. That's not going to work.
Because of the players that they have.
Players, yeah. And also his character. It's almost like England, they tend to go for a gentlemanly type, you know, someone who's not too outspoken, not too fiery. Allardyce maybe aside. But they went for Spalletti, and it's like, if things don't go well, what is he going to be like in the press conferences? And what is Gravina going to have to do to kind of cover for him if he says something out of place? And I think we might see some interesting things in the media. You know, the Italian papers naturally have already assassinated him, basically.
Yes.
Yes. And the whole team and everything to do with them, and they want change, they want heads to roll, and it's like that, you know. And national teams we see with England, it tends to be quite sensationalist. But if it were me, I think you've got to give him another tournament and just say, look, we're behind you here. But I wouldn't be surprised if something flares up, you know, and he walks or whatever. But I think tournament it's strange in itself because it's just like a distillation of everything that you see play out like over a normal season. Like I've been at 3 of the 4 England games, like in the crowd. And I was at the game on the round of 16 game. And with 5 minutes left, obviously 85 minutes, everybody's imploring for subs. Southgate, make a change. Southgate, you've got to go. Call him every word under the sun. And then, around 30, 40 minutes later, it's like, right, brilliant. Let's get some flights booked for Dusseldorf. It's fickle. That's the way because it's just a small sample size. And we were there watching Slovenia park the bus a little bit, make it difficult for us. And it's like, this is so frustrating coming up against these teams that don't want to play football. They just want to make it difficult for you. And then we're watching the game yesterday in the airport flight home, saying, go on, Slovenia, make it difficult for Portugal. You turn when it's not your team involved and you want them to do what but yeah, I'm finding it really hard to pick a potential winner at the moment. I think, as you say, Spain might have peaked a little bit too soon. Portugal were kind of my dark horses along with Germany, but it feels wrong to call them dark horses because they've got a lot of pedigree. And but yeah, I think that lineup for Friday, those games on Friday are mental. Like Germany, Spain, and Portugal, France. That's going to be nuts.
I've got to say, Austria are a team I've really enjoyed watching. Yeah, I should have said that earlier.
Yeah,
outside
we could
of
have had
the
Ranić.
mishap against Turkey, mishap against Portugal, I thought Turkey looked really well. But when they played Portugal and then they had that ridiculous own goal, I was like, okay, maybe this isn't the pick to put all my shits on, There's a video going around right now that I saw the other day, just kind of in the vein of what you're saying, Ollie. It was like a big watch party somewhere in London, and there was an interviewer going around, and it was seconds before Jude scored his bicycle kick. And
I've seen this.
He's talking to some girl, and he's like, what are your thoughts on Southgate? What do we need to do? And she's laying into him about how awful the team is, and then they both go,
People left the stadium. We were watching people go. And when that long throw went in, I was sat back on my seat and I was like this. And then when the goal went in, I just went like this, as if to say, how can they do this to us, And then, Kane scores and, back out to Germany on Friday. So that'll be fun. We got a couple of questions in, which we will finish with. First one's from Rohit Rajiv. He wants to know your thoughts on the production quality of Serie A compared to other leagues. It's something that's spoken about, like the TV rights package, but also like how well the league does as an export product, or not so well compared to others, as the numbers might show. But I think it's improving.
I do. Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think that it's something that the league has been acutely aware of, that there was perhaps a need to look at that and make it better. And I think it's only right that in whatever we do, we're always looking for those gains and how can things be improved. But I have a little bit of insight into the fact that I know for certain that there were people who were employed to focus just on that and say, people in other countries to say, look, we want to learn from you as well. How can we make this better? So the league are doing that. I've been actually contacted myself by a middle party to say, how do you think it could be improved? That the actual TV coverage in terms of the shots we get and things like that. So I've been quite impressed with that, actually, that they are taking that very seriously and they are looking to improve it. I'd say one thing I really love about the Serie A coverage, and I've noticed that they've been using it actually in the world feed coverage of the Euros, is, I don't know what you call it. Somebody will maybe write into us and tell us who knows about these things, but that camera that they use when it's right at the side of the pitch and it's a much higher quality of
4K. It's called 4K.
They've been using that particular camera a lot in Serie A, and I hadn't seen other leagues use it. And particularly when goals are being celebrated in Serie A. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but I love the real, almost cinematic type shots that we get now of the side of the pitch and of supporters as well. So I think that's something that maybe the World Feed guys have noticed and have started to do themselves this tournament. I've noticed that. So it can always get better. I'm sure they're well aware of that, but as I say, it's something that they're clearly aware of and are trying to do something about. So
you see that camera a lot in boxing. When the fighters are walking out, it's cool. You really feel like you're in
cinematic, isn't it? That's the best probably word I can think to describe it. You feel like you're almost inside it.
It looks like a video game almost because I think I don't know what it is. Like, again, someone will probably be able to write in and say, but it's almost like the the background remains clear, but the objects in the foreground get even clearer,
And
so they
exactly
stand
that,
out against the backdrop. It's brilliant. Like, I put my girlfriend through the ringer. She sits and watches games with me, but whenever they show that 4K camera, she's like, "Why? How come we don't have that in Premier League coverage?"
Yeah.
Like, there you go.
Yeah.
Serie A's leading the way.
Good.
Yeah, it does. Gregory Peck asks, and make this the final question. We've spoken a bit about Italy crashing out of the Euros with a whimper. That's what he says. Nicest way to put it. And about a potential reaction from the FIGC. Do you think that league regulations have something to do with Italy's struggle to produce top talent? Because there's the whole non-EU slots thing, and there was the growth decree giving like a salary discount for players that are coming from abroad. Do you think we'll now see a shift the other way in the regulations? Perhaps you need more homegrown players, or like Milan have just registered an under-23 team in Serie C. Might other teams do that a bit more so they can micromanage their talent?
There's people better qualified and will know more about this subject than me to sort of give a fuller answer on this. But what I would say anecdotally is that I feel that we need to see more young Italians playing in Serie A on a more regular basis. I suppose the counter argument to that is if they're good enough, they'll find their way through. But I think sometimes we do see in football, I've seen it many occasions, late bloomers, people who don't really start to truly show their promise until their early 20s, or, even you see some guys who don't even make international debuts till mid-20s, even late 20s. So I think that we sometimes presume that everyone will be at the top of their game when they're 18, 19, 20. That's not necessarily always the case. Some people need that room to grow, and it would be better, really, I suppose, ultimately for the national side if there were more young players able to develop in the top flight. We had this conversation in England years ago about getting more young English players in the Premier League, and subsequently we found ways to do that. I mean, you only have to look at the pool of players that Gareth Southgate has had to pick from over the last 5 or 6 years. Which, in terms of his tenure, it's not that far off a decade now, is it? What is about 8 years now? But across that time, it's undoubted that the amount of young English players getting minutes in the Premier League has gone up considerably over that time. So I would like to see that happen more often. There's maybe too many young Italian players playing in the lower reaches. But then again, people will throw back at you when I say that. Well, look at, for example, again, the England squad, and look how many of them went on loan to football league clubs. Some of them, several of them, I think it's 5 or 6 even played in the non-league divisions in England. So there's a benefit to that too. But I don't accept this, that you hear this panicky assessment that they're just not there anymore, the young Italian players. I mean, the under-17s have just won a major competition, haven't they? So that would suggest that that's not true. I think if you speak to people, and I do regularly, who have a passing interest in Italian football, one of the first things they'll say to me is, you love Italian football, don't you? You commentate on it all the time. The first thing they nearly always say is, where have all the top players gone? And they'll say, where's the Tottis these days? Where's the Del Pieros? Where's the Maldinis? And it's undeniable that the real elite world-class Italian players are in short supply right now. I mean, I look at someone like a Bastoni, and in my opinion, I think he's one of the top centre halves in the world right now.
Yeah, I agree.
But and Donnarumma, you could argue, certainly on his performance at the Euro, is one of the better goalkeepers in the world right now. But we're looking around, we're thinking, well, Chiesa could be, but he doesn't do it often enough. There isn't a real standout centre forward for Italy right now, is there? You look at players like Pellegrini, a very good player, but he's not nowhere near that bracket of the type of player I've just alluded to. So there isn't those world-class talents right now, and that's difficult to say why that isn't happening. I mean, again, it'll be something other people will have a view on, but yeah, I think a lot of this could be improved by just finding a way to get more young Italians playing regularly in Serie A. It's not rocket science, really, in that respect.
I think they lack a bit of aura, Italy. Like they lack the sort of chest out players where it's like, yeah, I'll take this on. I'll take on. Like, yeah, I don't know. I as you said, there's Italy fans who are far more qualified, but it does feel like there's a bit of star power lacking, and it's difficult because with the growth decree, the tax discount that they did, it was so Serie A could be competitive as a league and therefore as a product, attracting players over perhaps other leagues like the Premier League and La Liga. But now they're sort of saying, well, that might have a harmful effect because you look at the Milan squad, it's lacking in Italian players. Yes, the captain Calabria is Italian, but he's pretty much the only one in the starting lineup, and it seems like we're trying to phase him out as well by signing a new right back. No Milan players in the Italy squad, and I'm not saying that there's a correlation and causation there, but it's just Capello sort of came out and said, yeah, it's a bit of a problem. I mean, like Calafiori is probably a really interesting case study in himself because he was playing at Basel season before last, and Milan tried to sign him to be the backup left back on loan with an option to buy for 3 million. Bologna came along, took a punt on him. Motta worked with him, converted him to a left-sided centre back, and now he's a hot property, and he might be going to the Premier League for 30, 40 million. And I think he's sort of an example. Like there are players out there you can find them, give them a chance, and they'll do well. But then the flip side to that is like, they're lining up for a major tournament. It's like, who the hell is this guy from Bologna at centre back? It's a difficult one. We'll wrap it up there. Oh, go on.
Yeah, one of them's kind of a no-brainer. Doesn't really get talked about a whole lot, but winning's hard at the top level of football. You see Man City win consistently, and I think people forget that having a dynasty like that is one of the most impossible things in football, and yet they're doing it year after year. Even though it's coming down to the last day, they're still pulling it off, and that's extremely difficult to do. So when people see that, they just assume if you're a good team, you got to win everything every year, and that just doesn't happen. The other one, and this one's a bit more ironic given we're on a podcast, but I just think there's too much content today. I think we have an unprecedented level of access to the players, not just their personal lives on social media, but to their careers in general. Sites like Transfer Market, all the data, all the stats, every analytical piece you could think of, all the streaming rights to everything. Back even 15 years ago, you see a new player come up, have a good show, you say, who's that? And then you don't see him again until the next time.
Skilacci at the 1990 World Cup.
Yeah, there you go. So it's I don't know. I think we're too dialed in on these players and what they're doing now. Maybe because some of the older legends like Inzaghi, he didn't have the greatest numbers, but that's someone that everyone looks back at as like, that's a real striker, And I think in today's game, if we saw him coming up with these numbers, it'd say, oh yeah, he's just a good player, maybe above average, but he's not great. I don't know, maybe a hot take.
Well, I like it. We will end it there. Good note to end on. I've been your host, Ollie Fisher. Find me on Twitter at Ollie Fisher. AJ, cheers for joining.
Yep, I'll be here every week.
And thank you so much, Adam, for giving us an hour and 7 minutes of your time. Really, really appreciate it. And looking forward to hopefully seeing you on more Serie A commentary next year.
I'm hoping I get to go back to this place again very soon.
Do you know what? I always get asked, when are they knocking it down? Like, they can't. That's part of the problem. that's part of the issue.
Don Hutchison brought me that back, one of my Serie A Sunday night partners. Yeah. And so and then off my mantelpiece here, I got that done when I was there. I don't know if you can see that. When I was
yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Get it in shot there with Glenn Hoddle last year. So.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. There's not much leg room up there, is there?
What a great view, though. It's a great view to commentate from. So, I'm hoping it's not long until I'm back working. It's my